To introduce our first historical witness, we're going to hear from Judge Shirley Fulton. And after you hear from her, she will introduce our historic witness. And the historic witness will be questioned later by Commissioner Bob Ward as well. I turn it over to you, Dr. Fulton, to introduce our first witness. Good fella you got to introduce tonight.
Good evening. I am honored to introduce Senator Mohammed. Senator Mohammed is a longtime Charlotte resident who was born in the United States to hard-working immigrant parents from India. Senator Mohammed's passion for work and equity for equity, fairness, and opportunities for all led to North Carolina's Governor Roy Cooper appointing him to the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities and North Carolina's Task Force for Racial Equity in Criminal Justice. Mohammed's proven record of service to children and families and to his election to the North Carolina Senate in 2018, where he's working to ensure every family and every child has a chance at a brighter economic future, and to directly address some of the laws and the police that negatively impact the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Judge Fulton. Thank you to the commissioners, and thank you to the folks that are out there listening online today. Let me just begin by saying across our city, across our state, and across our country, more and more people are realizing that the role of race plays in so many factors of our society. People are also ready to learn more about our failings with regard to race, to acknowledge it and reconcile those shortcomings to create a better and more just system. From criminal justice to housing to healthcare, racism absolutely impacts the lives of Black people and other people of color every single day. The criminal justice system is fraught with built-in inequities. And in our state's unfortunate and tragic history with slavery and segregation has undoubtedly infiltrated the way justice has been carried throughout our state's existence. I have the honor of speaking with you today to briefly discuss some of the ways that the criminal justice system has historically been used as a weapon against Black and brown people. After the Civil War and the abolishment of slavery, freedmen across North Carolina struggled for work. There were places like Durham, North Carolina, that for a time were thriving Black communities during Reconstruction. But in many other places, this was not the case. Vagrant laws became a commonplace in North Carolina. These laws essentially forced freed Black people into abhorrent working conditions because the alternative was arrest and jail time. Side note, while such vagrancy laws were only repealed in 1983 by the North Carolina General Assembly, it's important to note that that was just 38 years ago. It's also important to note that vagrancy laws, in a sense, criminalized poverty, which is a practice you still see today with the overcriminalization of homeless people by arresting people for solicitation of alms, sleeping on a park bench, the use of court fees and fines, and even probationary supervision fees to this day. While vagrancy laws were forcing people into subpar work, there were other laws on the books that made it illegal to even receive a better employment offer from elsewhere. Enticement laws prevented other business owners from offering any employment to Black workers who were already employed. These laws essentially tied workers to their employers and opened other employers and workers themselves to even more potential criminal prosecution. At the same time, false pretense laws made it also impossible for African Americans to leave work on their own without facing criminal prosecution. In fact, these laws were written in such a way that no evidence was actually even needed to bring these charges against a worker, further solidifying that these laws had little to do with fraud and everything to do with forcing Black people to work. When the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, many believed that this to be the complete abolishment of slavery. However, there is an exception written in that allows for involuntary servitude when convicted of a crime. Still unsure the connection? Well, it's important to mention that North Carolina's first state prison construction began only in 1870, 5 years after the 13th Amendment's ratification. States have routinely used prison labor in a variety of ways, After the Civil War, North Carolina used prison labor to construct roads and railways. This is a practice still utilized today as inmates convicted of crimes perform a variety of tasks such as farming, construction, and some other aspects of road work, often for a maximum pay of $2.88 a day. The application of laws alone isn't the only cause for concern. We have got to acknowledge the trauma that the Black community as a collective has had to endure, from slavery to Jim Crow lynchings, disparate impact of the war on drugs, to extrajudicial killings of Black people by law enforcement. There is a consistent flow of traumatic events that Black Americans and other people of color have had to face, which has increased their likelihood in encountering the criminal justice system. And in speaking of trauma, this too often begins right at home for too many Black and brown children, with the incarceration of one or both their parents and the significant impact of abuse, neglect, and witnessing acts of violence in their community on the mental health of these young children at a very, very young age. Studies show these experiences, also known as adverse childhood experiences, can significantly increase the likelihood of a child becoming a victim of a crime and or becoming involved with the criminal justice system as a criminal defendant. So when you take a brutally racist history and add repetitive traumatic events and a general mistrust of law enforcement, we end up with statistics that illustrate racial inequity in our justice system. When Black people account for roughly 22% of North Carolina's population, but make up over half of our state's incarcerated population, we have a problem. When Black adults are almost 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as white adults, we have a problem. When Black drivers are approximately twice as likely as white drivers to be pulled over for a traffic stop, we have a problem. When Black men and white men are convicted for the same crime, but Black men receive a prison sentence that's almost 20% longer, we have a problem. When Black women are imprisoned at twice the rate as white women, we have a problem. When Black men, like you continue to see, are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement than a white man, we have a problem. And the problem with these inequities is so pervasive that they begin very early on. When Black students right here in North Carolina make up only 1/4 of our enrolled population in our public schools, but they receive more than 50% of school suspensions. This is how we begin to push our children out of our classrooms and to jail cells. Then there are people of color that are less likely to report crime to law enforcement, even as victims, because of the danger that they fear putting themselves in. This creates a serious problem for all our public safety. Communities are not safer with this mindset, and the onus should not be on the community members themselves to address it. We have to hold law enforcement and the criminal justice system largely accountable for their role in improving the relations with the public. We also have to do more of these types of forums today that engage both leaders and members of the community. Providing this type of platform to educate our community is vital. Over the last few years, there has been an increased push for changes to our criminal justice system, but these calls are not new. Some of the concerns are new, some are decades old, if not centuries old. So it's imperative that we don't give up hope, that we don't stop organizing, mobilizing, and fighting for what we believe in. We have got to challenge ourselves and our peers, and especially our white friends who for far too long have believed that we are near a race-neutral society. We are absolutely not. When it comes to dismantling the systems that have disadvantaged Black and brown people for so long, white people are crucial to this effort. Allyship is a necessary tool in this fight for progress, and it starts with educating ourselves, while some public schools even now are moving ahead with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Recently around the country, and especially right here in North Carolina, there's a significant push to stop our public school educators for teaching our students about our history's dark and racist systematic history in our curriculum. In fact, House Bill 324 passed the North Carolina House just yesterday, and critics have equated this bill to the practice of book burning in an attempt to shroud America's dark and shameful history of racial inequities. Let me be the first to say I think we have come a long way from our founding, but to think that we do not need to tell the full story of our history is wrong and only serves to exclude groups of people and their personal experiences and their stories, and that makes us who we are. Be a part of a movement that aims to take racial equity from being political to practical. After all, we are talking about lives and equality and justice guaranteed to all by our Constitution. When I think about the leaders in our country's civil rights movement, I cannot begin to imagine the setbacks, the roadblocks, the closed doors, and the fierce opposition they may have felt fighting for the advancement of civil justice and labor rights. I think about how many times an ordinary person would say, maybe we should stop, or maybe we should give up when faced with the extreme challenge of creating change in our society. And then we remember just how far we have come, thanks to the work of those that have come before us. I remember that none of the biggest steps forward that we have taken in this country, like the abolishment of slavery, voting rights for women and people of color, the desegregation of our schools, none of these happened overnight. It took years of organizing and mobilizing. It took plenty of small wins, but even major losses. It took perseverance and unyielding hope that the work we do today will absolutely amount to so much more tomorrow. And this work is critical because everyone deserves access to justice. Just think how many more George Floyds, Breonna Taylors, and Andrew Brown Jr.'s are out there at this very moment being dehumanized every single day of their lives, and you and I don't even know about it. And by the time we have left this forum tonight, how many more will have paid the heaviest price for being Black in America with their lives? I believe we can and must go further to address the disparate racial outcomes at every stage of our justice system. This is our opportunity to come together and push for a justice system in our state and our country that treats everyone equally under the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mohammed. I really appreciate you coming this evening and speaking with us and speaking some hard truths and a lot of it, by the way. I was wondering if there's a way, a bit of a takeaway, particularly for our viewers, if you could write a headline or anything that could sort of say, you know, the crux to the message about the racialization of criminal justice in America, but particularly here in North Carolina, what might that be?
Thank you, Bob, for that question. I think it would be something along the lines of racism runs deep, the role of race in crafting our criminal justice system.
And if you could share a little bit about the Racial Equity Commission that you have been a part of, and maybe some of the solutions that they are presenting, could you speak to that?
Sure, Bob. Look, the Racial Equity Task Force on Criminal Justice was formed over the summer, led by, of course, Governor Cooper's executive order, led by our co-chairs, Attorney General Josh Stein and Justice Anita Earls on the North Carolina Supreme Court. We had over 24 members. A lot of the members were advocates, elected officials, judges, state and local law enforcement, justice-involved individuals, victims and disability rights advocates, and so many more. We came up with over 125 policy solutions to address systematic racial bias in our criminal justice system. We've submitted those as legislative and municipal recommendations as well. This comprehensive report covers everything from mental health, policing accountability and transparency, to the use of force, use of court fees and fines, and racial inequities in our courts, decriminalization of marijuana, and even so much more. I will tell you, during the formation of our recommendations, we reached out to a number of academic experts and groups, and even the general public. We had countless listening sessions, public comment sessions, which is what brought the report at the end of December. We've thankfully, in this session of the North Carolina General Assembly, I'll tell you, about 2 weeks ago, we had the State of the State, Bob, and the one line that Governor Cooper said, he mentioned that racial justice for all is critical in North Carolina. And that was one of the lines that stood out to me when I was on the floor of the North Carolina General Assembly, that both Republicans and Democrats stood up and applauded that line. But we can't just applaud, we've got to continue the work. So I'm proud to tell you, just yesterday as well, Senate Bill 300, a bipartisan effort passed the North Carolina General Assembly. It covers a number of provisions as far as creating some sort of use of force databases, to requiring duty to intervene, duty to render aid, making sure that police officers get psychological screenings, allowing the victims of a family to see video disclosure of their loved one within 5 days of their request, unredacted full video. If law enforcement has a concern, they can go petition a judge. Currently, under the law, video disclosures and public releases aren't allowed unless a judge allows them. Law enforcement is only allowed to provide relevant portions that they deem relevant, which is why you saw in the case of Andrew Brown Jr., the family only saw 20 seconds of a video clip, which is ridiculous because they deserved much more better than that. So we've got some great bipartisan efforts. We've got to continue to do more, like reforming our cash bail system, decriminalization of things like marijuana, making sure we're making proper investments to increase much more accountability and transparency in law enforcement, and so much more.
Thank you so much. I would like very much to continue this conversation, but we do have a full docket, as it were. And so again, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this evening, and look forward to further learning more from you as we go forward. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so very much, Judge Fulton, for the introduction of Senator Mohammed, Bob Ward for the questioning. And Senator Mohammed, you are utterly amazing. That was a fabulous testimony. We're grateful for the work that you're doing in the Senate, and we ask that you continue to keep us apprised of things that we might be able to support you with as you work for greater racial justice in the court systems of North Carolina, as well as in the General Assembly.